In 2017, the Atlanta Hawks began their first rebuild in over a decade, and after an expected poor season, the Hawks held the third overall pick in the 2018 draft, with international superstar Luka Doncic still on the board. But instead of drafting Doncic, the Hawks traded back to the fifth overall pick and selected Trae Young, the point guard out of Oklahoma that led college basketball in both points and assists per game. It was this one trade that catapulted both franchises, as in just 6 years, both the Hawks and Mavericks would make it to their respective conference finals. But while Luka Doncic has made a case to be one of the 3 best NBA players in the world, the public opinion on Trae Young has shifted dramatically over the past 3 years. In 2021, the Hawks finished with a 41-31 record and as the 5th seed in the Eastern Conference. Playoff expectations were low for a team that finished below 500 for the previous 3 years, and the 4th seeded Knicks, the team the Hawks were going to play in the first round, was a hype train solely because it was New York's first glimpse of playoff basketball in over 5 years. And in that series, Trae Young conquered Madison Square Garden, so much so that to this day, he's violently booed every time he touches the floor in New York. In the next round, the Hawks played the first-seeded Sixers, and after a Ben Simmons meltdown and a little bit of luck, the Hawks then advanced to the Eastern Conference Finals before falling to the Bucks in 6 games. It looked like the sky was the limit for the Hawks, as after another year of development and a deep playoff run under their belt, Atlanta felt ahead of schedule and ready to potentially make an NBA Finals within the next 5 years. But 3 years and 3 disappointing seasons later, and the Hawks feel stuck in mediocrity despite making moves that improved the overall talent of the team. And now in 2024, many consider Trae Young to be the most overrated player in the league and someone who can't be a winning player. And while I don't necessarily disagree with some of the claims made about Trae Young, I also don't think it's fair to count out and disrespect a player that has accomplished as much as Trae Young has in just 6 years in the league. We as NBA fans are way too quick to judge a player who has just entered the league. I'm not backing away from this conversation myself because I'm definitely guilty of misjudging a player in their early 20s. But over the past year or so, it's been more apparent to me how players like Luka, Shea, Anthony Edwards, Ja, and so many more have broken all NBA conversations. We use their success as the standard, when in all reality, it's an anomaly. In any given years, we will see 10 to 15 first-round picks struggle in their first years in the league, while 2 to 3 flourish. That's how it's always been, and that's how it's always going to be. To bring this back to Trae Young, he's absolutely one of the successes from his draft class, and to act like he's overrated when he's been an all-star talent for half a decade is disrespectful. In fact, it's honestly amazing that a guard the size of Trae Young is a success, because even with his potential size problems, even with some deficiencies on the defensive side of the ball, he still turned himself into one of the best offensive threats in the league, so much so that the Hawks decided to build their franchise around him. And I don't want to sound too positive about Trae Young here, because I know he's nowhere near a perfect player, but you also have to realize that he's only 25 years old and likely hasn't reached his final form yet. There's a world where the Hawks build a proper team around him with 3-and-D guys at the wing position, a versatile big man who can catch lobs and block shots, and a 2-guard next to him that can facilitate and defend without taking too much away from Trae's offensive game. And that's what the Hawks tried to do years ago, but it didn't work. I mentioned earlier about how Atlanta surrounded Trae with talent before and after that Eastern Conference Finals run, and it's true. The moves that they made ultimately made sense, like drafting DeAndre Hunter with the 4th overall pick in 2019. That was absolutely the right pick. Out of college, Hunter was a versatile, defensive-minded wing who could play off the ball, but in Atlanta, he turned into a defensive liability and someone who needed the ball in their hands to be properly utilized. That's obviously not saying that Hunter isn't a bad NBA player, because in all reality, he's actually extremely underrated. He just doesn't fit Atlanta at all, especially with Trae Young as the number 1 option there. Then you look at DeJounte Murray, a player in San Antonio who would have fit perfectly in Atlanta, so much so that the Hawks front office was willing to give up 3 unprotected first-round picks to get him. But when he made it to Atlanta, it was like he was a completely different player. He lost one of the key assets that made him so important to the game, and that's his defensive intensity. And it even got to the point where he was statistically worse than Trae Young defensively last season. It got so bad that the Hawks traded Murray away for 2 firsts that are likely going to be in the late teens and Dyson Daniels, an unproven, albeit potential field guard. And now, in 2024, the Hawks got extremely lucky and jumped from pick 11 to pick number 1 in the draft lottery. But unfortunately for them, there was no Victor Wembanyama, and instead, they had to settle for Zachary Ricochet, a lengthy forward who's nowhere near close to being a complete product. You factor all of that in, and you mix in some other questionable front office decisions like letting Kevin Huerter go in free agency in 2022 and trading away their 2022 first round pick AJ Griffin for a late second in the 2024 NBA draft, and it makes sense why Trae Young is seen as overrated to so many people. It's because the roster around Trae Young has never fit his playing style, and as a result, the Hawks have been underwhelming even if they've had many talented players on the roster. But even with his recent struggles, one could argue that the majority of Trae Young hate is due to the 2018 draft night trade. Again, it was here that the Atlanta Hawks traded the 3rd overall pick to the Mavericks, so Dallas could select Luka and Atlanta could select Trae. And because of this trade, the Hawks unintentionally created an unnecessary comparison between Doncic and Trae solely because they were traded for one another. And as a result, because Trae hasn't performed at the levels that Doncic has, it's easy to discredit what Trae has done all before he's turned 26 years old. And with a new, younger core around him, maybe this season is where Trae Young takes that next step and eventually reaches that level that we saw in the 2021 postseason again. But maybe I'm asking too much of him. Maybe we've already seen Trae Young's peak. Maybe the Hawks catered to him too much at a young age and built a player that ultimately never wins a ring or contributes to serious playoff success ever again. I think most agree that the Trae Young hate has gone too far, but the one thing I can agree on is that Trae Young, at his current state, will never win an NBA title. If you look back on the last 25 years of NBA history, rarely do you see the all-offense, minimal defense guard make an impact on playoff basketball. Think of guys like Steve Nash, Damian Lillard, Isaiah Thomas, and the one exception to the list, Allen Iverson, though you could say his 2001 finals run was due to playing in a weak Eastern Conference and that Vince Carter decided to go to his college graduation right before Game 7 of the Eastern Conference semifinals and shot 6 for 18 in a 1-point loss. Okay, that last part might have been me coping, but still, it's so incredibly rare to see a player in that mold make a deep playoff run, and maybe, just maybe, 2021 was Trae's. But there's still a chance for Trae to escape that mold and prove all the doubters wrong. But unfortunately for him, it would come at a cost. I think we all can agree that Trae Young will never be the first option on a championship team. I also think we can agree that no one on this Hawks roster has the potential to overtake Trae Young as a number 1 option. So the first sacrifice Trae Young would have to make is requesting a trade from the team that traded for and drafted him, and requesting a trade from the city that has accepted him as the face of the franchise. It's a move that would cause a lot of backlash, and while everyone loves a player who stays loyal, for the sake of Trae Young's career, he would need to ask out. But to what team? Man, if there were only a team with multiple young defensive stoppers, specifically one at the guard position and one at the center position, and oh yeah, maybe that center is like this 7'4" alien who can do it all on the court and has a potential to be the greatest ever. I don't know exactly how the Spurs get this trade done, but I would assume the Spurs have been holding out to find their point guard of the future, or else they would have just stuck with Rob Dillingham at the 8th overall pick instead of trading him to Minnesota. And what better player to add than Trae Young, an elite playmaker and perimeter scorer, something the Spurs don't have today. But here's the catch, and something that Trae will have to sacrifice. If Trae Young were to go to the Spurs, or any other team looking to contend in the near future for that matter, he would have to give up shots and focus more on the playmaking aspect of his game. That's of course a big risk for the Spurs and for Trae Young to make, but if it all works out the way it should, the Spurs would easily be a Western Conference contender for over a decade and likely win a title. There's a path where Trae Young can redeem himself in the eyes of NBA fans and contribute to winning basketball while maintaining his star status. There's also a path where he stays in Atlanta and retires a legend of the city, but is deemed overrated in all-time conversations. Both paths have value, and it all depends on what Trae wants his career to be remembered for. But back to the original conversation, why does everyone hate Trae Young? Is it because he found success early in his career and talked trash in the playoffs? Is it because he hasn't done much with his career since the 2021 conference finals run? Or is it because people's hopes for Trae Young's career hasn't gone to plan, with up and down play plaguing the last 3 years of his career? In all likelihood, it's a combination of all three, and that just doesn't sit right with me. We have players in this league who have done some really messed up stuff and gotten a second chance, but most fans spend their hate on the guy who talked trash to New York 3 years ago that's been inconsistent somewhat due to problems constructing a roster around him. So for the sake of Trae Young and for healthy NBA conversations in the future, I hope he gets over the hump and wins a title wherever he may end up so we can focus on the real problems with this league. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you agree or disagree with anything I said about Trae Young, or if I left off an obvious reason why many hate him, make sure to comment down below your thoughts. So with that, thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.